Steve and Luke.
Yo.
Yo.
And you're going to join us on a adventurous quest through horror and, I don't know, death. This is actually going to be a remake of our first episode. Unfortunately, that episode does not exist anymore. It was called Xenomorphing Out on the Alien franchise. So we decided to, in honor of the new movie coming out, we decided to go back over and redo this episode. So we're going to go ahead and discuss the Alien franchise in its entirety on this episode of Real Sharks. So let's get started. All right, guys. How should we go about this? As a whole, and I'll start out with Luke here. Luke, What do you think of the Alien franchise right now? Because we got a new one coming out.
We do have a new one coming out.
And we have a show that's going to be coming out as well.
And a show. And,
plenty of novels.
A lot of novels, a lot of comics, a lot of video games. It's a very huge sci-fi property. With arguably only two good movies. Obviously, it's debatable. There's debate. I think one of the things to its credit is that it is obviously much more of a horror franchise. The thing about horror movies is that, there's a less expectation of masterpieces. Friday the 13th, Nightmare Before, like the 80s slasher,
right? Which
the second movie came out during that. There's a little bit more of an expectation of that, there's just going to be like movie after movie after movie after movie. A lot of it might be garbage. Some of it might be good. Some of it will be great. I think, by that logic then, it's hard for Aliens to ever truly lose steam. Because I think if you have it as a horror movie, then there's always a chance to just come back to it at a later date, which we've done with pretty much every horror franchise from the 80s recently. But as a brand, though, I would say yes, it's pretty much propped up by the true believers. It's lost. It has lost a lot of the shine. And a lot of the attempts to kind of reboot it, to kind of bring it into the modern age, to bring in new fans, have not worked. I would say, if anything is bringing in new people, it's younger people coming back to those original two, Alien and Aliens.
Okay.
So, but that's what I would have to say.
I would say it is one of the greatest franchises. Can't talk today. Greatest franchises to ever cross genres. Meaning, not only is it straight horror, but it also was one of the greatest action films of all time, being Aliens.
Sure. Yeah.
I think there is a place in cinema for these movies because it also dawned, besides Jaws, one of the greatest monsters of all time, being the xenomorph, that has also crossed genres and even movies with the Alien versus Predator franchise, including in the comics. I think it also started the career and really showed audiences that there can be a female lead character and she can be heroic and she can actually carry a film. That's why, to me, Alien is that prime example of when I say you can have a female lead and they can carry the franchise. Because I think Sigourney Weaver has been amazing.
Ripley's one of the great, one of the great genre heroes, or the greatest, probably.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably the greatest. I don't think anyone really tops her as far as pop culture goes. She's the gold standard.
What do you think of Alien franchise, Steve?
Yeah, man, I agree with pretty much what you guys had to say. I had the same take on it. It's one of those. It's known for a reason, and there's so many adaptations for it because obviously there's always a chance to draw money on the name Alien. And like Lucas said, I mean, movies, TV shows, comics, video games, spanning the decades that since the creation of the first movie, where again it was like an experiment. Again, you know what I mean? Like Alien was not like this. It's like Star Wars, right? It's an experimental film that no one knew was going to blow up as much as it did.
Yeah.
And then it got big, and it's the 80s because wasn't there a large gap between Alien and Aliens, because Alien came out in like the late 70s, like
Yeah, we'll get to
Yeah,
that.
and 80. Yeah, Aliens was because it was James Cameron too, so it was
Right.
it kind of came out it was
1979. There it is. Yeah,
And then Aliens came out in 1986.
86. So
Yeah.
that's 7 years.
that's a
Right.
pretty significant jump between sequels, and then for it to change genres too, from like it being a semi horror to straight out action, and both of them do extraordinarily well is pretty well. Even we talk a lot of crap about it, but even Aliens 3, I remember
We're
there
gonna
was
get to
still
that.
significant hype around that film, whether it did good or not. I mean, people were still
Right.
interested in it. But yeah, I think that this is Luke is completely right. I think we're seeing new adaptations for it because the younger generation are going back and rediscovering the original two in the franchise, and it's reinvigorating it. And I also believe Ripley, just as a character, really has a lot to do with the success of the franchise. We can
Right.
just say, oh, whatever. But truly, I mean, Ripley, if it wasn't for Ripley, if she was just a guy, right, it would be still good, but it wouldn't have that, like, I don't know how to put it. It's like a survival instincts from a woman's standpoint, like in the first film where she's completely vulnerable at the end of the film, where she's like, pretty much half naked, and now
And
she has
we'll
full
move into that right now.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk about the first one. Of course, as Steve said, came out in 1979. Basically, the synopsis of this film is the crew of a commercial spacecraft encounters a deadly life form after investigating a mysterious transmission of unknown origin. Um, so of course starts Sigourney Weaver, Tom Skerritt, John Hurt, Veronica Cartwright, Harry Dean Stanton, and Ian Holm. The production and the effects were done by Geiger. And that's where the xenomorph, as everyone would be known to, came to be, and it was through his artwork. Really scary, very sexual in nature. And that's something that's actually I want to point out too. Originally, Alien was supposed to be a very sexual film, and there is actually still spots in that. But the difference is interesting between these two films. So as we were talking about, so Alien also did something that Jaws did, which was hide the monster for so long. Not only that, but when you actually seen the monsters, you've seen it in such horrific scenes. It actually scared people to the point of where they said, quote unquote, people were crawling out of theaters. Not to mention the chest burster scene is so organic because a lot of that blood splatter was actually really filmed on the crew as it happened. So when one of the crew goes and they scream, that's real blood on her. That was so horrific at the time when they filmed it. They actually didn't know if the film was going to be X-rated because they were like, this is borderline almost like porn. No one had ever seen something so graphic like that. But ultimately it all began with a film called Dark Star.
Dark Star.
From 1974 with Dan O'Brien in it. And this was actually a John Carpenter film about a crew on a deteriorating starship called Dark Star. It was originally meant to be a comedy, but apparently it wasn't a very good comedy. And so Dan O'Brien, knowing this, kind of wrote Alien. He basically, him and the other writers came up with Alien, and that's how Alien really came to be. That and Total Recall, actually, but that's a whole other thing. So, I think Alien is, the way it's set up too is just fantastic. There wasn't many good starship scenes back then, but Star Wars, and this was probably one of the better ones that actually came out too, because they were so worried too about emulating Star Wars at that time, because Star Wars had only came out like a few years ago, and that was one of the worries they had. But the thing about Alien and the way it looks is totally different though from Star Wars. It's not clean, it's dirty. You can tell that these are just regular blue collar guys. It seems like truckers on a mission. You don't get this sense of like anyone really knows what's going on, which is why the film is so terrifying too, because you learn with the crew the horrors in which they're facing. Now you can say, well, now we know what they're facing. Not when this movie came out. You didn't know what the xenomorph was gonna actually be. So it's one of the more terrifying films for a lot of people, and I find it terrifying too. And this one was done by Ridley Scott. As I said, it was written by Dan O'Brien and Ronald Shusett. And at first, it was meant for a male role, but they actually Sigourney Weaver was an upcoming actress and everything, and they wanted, they were like, "Hey, let's have her take a crack at it." And she is the icon that we talked about now. I think the special effects of this movie, though, hands down, even to this day, one of the greatest. One of the greatest films of all time. It's organic. It looks so good. The egg scene when the face hugger comes out, and that's the whole element, the sexual element I'm getting at too, because it's supposed to be this idea of something like forcing its way into you, and that was all of Geiger's kind of like idea for his idea for this thing. And he said it came from his dreams, a lot of this, including the derelict ship, and we also got the lore of the space jockeys. That is one thing that Alien did, and I'm sorry, I know I'm going on, guys, but that's one thing Alien did, was help set up the base lore in which James Cameron and a lot of people would build off of. But it's interesting because as we get later on into Prometheus, you'll see where the ideas for the movie shifted with Ridley Scott. So that's my whole take on Alien. It gets an 8.5 on IMDb. I'd give it actually a 9. This is one of the movies I'd give it a close 10 almost. I think Alien is extremely great. But I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say.
You said it basically. It's
Sorry.
It's a great start, for the series. It still is like, there's in pop culture, there's a back and forth between whether Alien or Aliens is the better film. I obviously, for me, it's like you can't have Aliens without Alien, and that sounds like reductive, but like,
no, it's true.
Alien's real strength is what it builds off of Alien. And it, with this movie, this singular movie, it is kind of crazy how much everybody else sort of apes it. I was thinking about like how many sci-fi video games are just Alien again and again. Then obviously there are tons of movies that are also basically just Alien. But
Tomorrow War was basically Alien.
It was based, yeah.
Yeah, and then I was thinking about Dead Space. I was thinking about oh gosh, I blanked on it. But it's crazy just how essentially the Alien is like the formula. That for a lot of movies, it's like if you want to make a sci-fi horror movie, you are essentially always, it all kind of like reverts back to doing Alien. The same way Star Wars is the monomyth, and all of those movies tend to have like that same formula of like loner kid, orphan kid who gets a mentor. They fight the Dark Lord. Right.
It's
all it's actually he's related or whatever. How all the movies try to be Star Wars. Anything that is in space and is horror is to some degree, you can't not think about it. Alien.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, dude. Straight up. I mean, yeah, you guys both said it. This is the only thing I take away personally for myself when I watch Aliens. I'm like, a lot of people, or Alien rather, a lot of people don't like the character Lambert in the film by Veronica Cartwright. I'm like, that's probably my favorite character in the first movie, just because she's the most like organic, like
vulnerable,
the actual like a person dealing with a alien bursting out of a human being's chest would be. You'd be screaming. You would be like, I went off this ship, and you would just be inconsolable, and just seeing the film and seeing how you're like, thank God it was made in the 70s, so it could just have that room to grow and be just what it is, you know what I mean? Just like a Star Wars, where it's like we're just gonna try something crazy. We're not gonna have any constraints. We're gonna do some things that may be taboo. Even the android, the android, like getting his
Glad you
head
brought that up.
split. Yeah, the Ash thing.
The idea that it
like
was
crazy.
that's a twist because they
Right.
didn't know it was an android. It was
Yeah.
one of those horror twists too. Upon the organism, the xenomorph, getting big from a little snake thing. You also had the alien, not to mention you also had the android, but not to mention we were introduced to Weyland Yutani, one of the key factors of the franchise that would be pretty much
Pretty much
ongoing
the
forever.
face of it. Yeah, it's like now it's the face of the damn franchise is Wayland. You can't go a movie without them saying Wayland's attached to it if it's got aliens in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely like it was hinted because it's the first film. They were just
Right.
trying things.
It was
They
the
were.
company at first.
It was the
Originally, it was
company.
just the company.
Yeah, and it's great, and you can see too that I mean we'll get to it in the second film where they really hammer home Wayland being like a message for like what was going on at the time. But yeah, definitely this film was influential, and we see it to this day.
So let's go ahead and move into Aliens. So this is where they actually kind of diverge in the whole lore of Aliens. Unfortunately, Ridley Scott would play it back up later, but James Cameron actually created a lot of what we would know today. Apparently, it was rumored that he went in the studio, wrote Alien up on the board because they had thought about redoing doing another movie for a long time. He apparently went up there, wrote an S at the end of the movie, and put a dollar sign through it. And how right he was. Like,
Yeah, he was right.
Starred again Sigourney Weaver, Carrie Henn as Rebecca, Michael Biehn as corporate Dwayne Hicks.
Come with me if you want to live.
Paul Reiser as Carter Burke, Lance Hargensen as Bishop, the late great Bill Paxton. William Hope was in it. Janet Goldstein, Al Matthews, Mark Rolston, and Rico Ross was Private Frost. So the synopsis is: after floating in space for 57 years, Ripley, Sigourney Weaver, shuttle is found by a deep space salvage team. Upon her arriving at LV-426, the Marines find only one survivor, a 9-year-old girl named Newt. But even these battle-hardened Marines with all the latest weaponry are no match for the hundreds of aliens that have invaded the colony. And remember, people, in space, no one can hear you scream. Which
Again,
is
that's great tagline. It's an all-timer.
So this movie is what would ultimately, like I said, give rise to the rest of the lore that we all know, which is the hive lore. So James Cameron was the one that invented basically this hive aspect, that the idea that the aliens are like basically like ants. They basically have a queen that lays the eggs, that they basically, they use host people or whatever they can find. And basically, that's how they get xenomorphs. What to say about Aliens, guy? Aliens, one of the greatest action films I've ever seen in my life. Probably one to the day I die I can always watch over and over again. I mean, this movie has everything that you would want in it. Not to mention so many side stories that would be birthed from this movie in the comics and the novels, especially with Bishop, the robot in this movie. The android had a way more bigger impact in this film than the others. Not to mention Sigourney Weaver, ultimate one-liner,
Get away from her, you bitch!
is very iconic, and she
It's
had
up there with the Arnold quote.
right. She had the power lifter fighting the queen. There was so many good effects in this film too, and we got introduced to the pulse rifle. I mean, I can go on and on about how much Aliens has influenced so much pop culture. I mean, video games after video games after video games are based off of this one film.
Any space video game almost is based off of these Space Marines. You know what I mean?
Right. Steve, what do you think about Aliens?
Dude, Aliens, yeah. It ages well. It's just kind of like, it's like Terminator 2, which, just a fun fact. It's funny that Lance Henderson, being Bishop, who's an android in this film, he was supposed to be was one of the runner-ups for the original Terminator and got beat out by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he was also in that first film as well.
Yeah, he's one of the police officers. Yeah,
he's one of the police officers. So
who gets killed by Arnold.
Right, he gets killed by Arnold, and now he is an android, so he gets to be sort of a Terminator type in this film. So it's just hilarious that two big action franchises, horror action, by the way, too, because that's another one that had a horror and then went to action. This is. Yeah, it's one of the greatest of all time. It's timeless. It has so many quotes that just keep on giving. The characters keep on giving. Game over, man. Game over. Bill Paxton being over the top characters in an over the top settings, and of course more aliens.
Luke, what did you think of Aliens?
I just wanted to first point out that when I was at WonderCon, I saw Jeanette Goldstein, who played Private Vasquez. She was in a row of booths with the guy that played the Lizard Man in that one Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
Her booth was right, and it wasn't one of those like you could go. It wasn't like they weren't like the guests where you would go into the queue to pay for the auditions. It was just like a booth right by that you could walk up to, which was weird. But yeah, I gotta say it's insane. The combo Cameron did with Aliens and the Terminator 2. I think there are very few. And it's very hard for me to think of like blockbuster filmmakers who hit it that hard, who got that that level. I mean, that's why he made Avatar.
Two lightnings in a bottle.
Like, that's why he had to make Avatar. He had to make the most expensive film. He had to make new technology. He had to essentially create an alien race on another. He had to make a movie that made people depressed that it doesn't exist in order to follow up the combination of Aliens and Terminator 2. Like, there's that. I think like that is really, if that should be the mark. Like, whatever your thoughts are, and I know we're not going to talk about Avatar, but it's like, whatever your thoughts on Avatar, it's important to remember that the reason Avatar exists is because James Cameron had to top himself after Aliens. He had to, well, first he had to make Terminator 2 to top Aliens 2. He had to to top Aliens. And then he had to make Avatar to top, like, that is how crazy, that is the level of quality he had to ascribe to.
Yeah.
You want to talk, that's some Jordan era bullshit, Chicago Bulls Jordan era.
What gave him such a high budget too was the fact that Terminator did so well. That's why he had such a high budget on Alien. Terminator gave him the ability to do that, as well as Terminator 2 with the budget.
That's also a really important point too, because Alien wasn't necessarily low budget, but it was made, but it wasn't, super expensive.
Right.
And so it's one of the worst things that can happen to a good horror franchise is that the budget gets too big and they just fill it with unnecessary crap. Cameron really he took the bigger budget, he took the larger scale, and he didn't bloat it. He still made it. He just simply made it bigger, and not in a way that felt extravagant and didn't take away from what we already had with Alien, which is something that pretty much most other sequels don't do. The only other sequel I can think of that did that in the same way is, of course, Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the more interesting things about the story too is not only is it you get introduced to the colonial marines, which would become so deep in the lore, but also again the Weyland-Yutani Company would become more of a forefront for the evil corporation in this film, which they were basically trying to get their hands on the alien the whole time for bioweapon research. Which of course, which I love because they're like Engine and they never learn their fucking lesson. They just just keep making dinosaurs. Oh, we'll just keep fucking finding xenomorphs. You're really bad at this. Stop.
That's kind of the only issue I have as I watched it growing. It's like, God, they are just so no middle ground. Like, we are the Empire. We are evil for the sake of being evil. It's like, okay, we get it. You want the eggs and stuff like that, but they're so evil in this one. It's laughable.
All right, so let's go ahead and move into what ultimately this is going to be an argument, ladies and gentlemen, on this one. This is probably going to be one of the biggest arguments on this this episode. We're going to move into 1992's Alien 3. Now, this movie was kind of similar to Jurassic Park 3, in which it was plagued by rewrites, new directors, I mean, everything and anything that can happen horribly in a film happened in this film. Basically, the story is Ellen Ripley, Sigourney Weaver, is the only survivor when she crash lands on Fiona 161, a bleak wasteland inhabited by inmates. It's a planet maximum security prison. Once again, Ripley must face the skepticism and the alien as it hunts down the prisoners and guards. Without weapons, modern technology of any kind, Ripley leads the men into battle against the terrifying creature. We would be introduced to the runner alien, which of course is when a alien gets introduced to a dog. Again, we had Sigourney Weaver. We had Charles S. Dutton as Dylan. We had Charles Dance as Clemens. Of course, you know who that is, Tyrion Lannister. Paul McGann, Brian Glover, Ralph Brown. We had Danny Webb, Christopher John Fields, Holt McKinley, Lance Harkinson again was Bishop, but he was in there for just a moment. And of course, Christopher Farbank. Um, you know, it's weird because Alien 3 was originally supposed to be like some kind of. First of all, everyone is very upset about this one because we had the happy ending of Aliens, in which basically Ripley gets on the ship with Hicks, you know, and Bishop and Newt, and they basically go off into the sunset, or basically the galaxy, so to say. And basically, Aliens 3 is basically where let's kill everyone off who you loved in a horrific way and only leave Ripley. But not only that, as I didn't even mention, Ripley actually has an alien insider in this film too. And the alien is just this is one of the more gory ones too of the franchise. This one, they're really the alien is really really ripping them apart. But this it's funny, man, because the more I watch this film, and you guys have heard my opinions about this before, we just talked about two of the greatest films in movie history, Alien and Aliens. How the hell was someone gonna follow this up? Now I know what you're thinking, and it's been done, you know, with Lord of the Rings. Star Wars did it, you know, but that is so far and few between that happens nowadays. Not to mention Lord of the Rings was already laid out.
Yeah.
Most of the trilogy films are already laid, but look at the ones that do exist, you know, Pirates of the Caribbean. Nah. A lot of those films, the third film just isn't, you know, and that's what a lot of people have.
It's hard to do that.
They have that opinion of Aliens, of Alien 3. And, you know, my opinion on it is kind of in between. I see a film that really, if it was the ending of the movies, if that was how you were going to end the story, I thought the ending was just. I thought it was good. I thought it showed how tough Ripley was. You had, you know, the corporation who came again, you know, with Bishop as like, you know, extending that olive branch, saying we'll take it out of you, you know, we'll take it, you know, and she doesn't believe him, and then she basically goes into the molten lead, and you know, then he's like, think of what we can learn. So he was lying anyway to her. So it was all a ruse, but you know, she goes on to destroy herself and ultimately destroy the species, which like, you know, kind of started her destiny, if you want to say it. These creatures were part of her destiny, and you know, for all the flaws that it has, and it has many in this movie, it has some great scenes. And I know Steve knows one of the scenes I'm very fond of, which is the burial scene where they're casting Newt and Hicks into the fire. And Dylan gives that speech about, you know, committing bodies into the void in the hope that a flower, and as he's talking about this, the alien is bursting out of the dog. So it's like, it's like poetic and disturbing at the same time. And it's like, you don't know really which way to go about it. And before I turn it over to the guys, I want to mention too, they actually made a little dog as the little alien. He was actually, it was a little doggy that was originally the prop alien. And they actually tried to make the runner like a little dog, but that didn't work out. So they actually had to use CGI. This is also too where they started moving the aliens away from the practical effects. Yeah. So I'm interested to hear what you guys, because I know we all don't feel the same way about Alien 3.
Well, not anymore. We don't. Yeah, I don't know, man. This is. I still, even with the films, I still think you know, it's just that it leaves such a bad taste in your mouth right in the beginning, where they go, you know, hey, the child Hicks, you know, everyone's dead. You.
By the way, Hicks is like brutally So is Newt.
No,
And
it's
apparently
new,
those
yeah.
scenes were supposed to be more graphic, and they had to tone them down.
Oh.
Right. And I'm just like, why do that? I understand they're like, we need to do something that's gonna be like shocking. But man, did you tip in the wrong way of the scales with that one, like right off the bat, so people are mad while watching it. And then, just like you said, I
This
think
was
they
directed
wanted
by
to.
David Fincher too, by the way.
Yeah, which is, it's an interesting thing that too. I always think of that. I'm like, man, and this is the first one in the 90s. So I felt like Fincher was like, we just have to up the ante with a lot of things, right? I mean, he does that in a lot of his films anyway. He pushes the envelope of gore. I mean, he did that with Seven, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but you don't really see a whole lot in that one, but you get the gore. You know what I mean? You
No,
get the gore
7 is
aspect.
disturbing.
It's disturbing, and I felt like he wanted to do that with Alien 3. And in a way, he kind of did, because you're right, Rob. Like, Alien really does go ham in this one, but it's also, I don't know, it's just something like, it doesn't even feel like a movie. It felt like a side plot in a comic that,
And a
like,
lot of
what
people
if?
choose it to be like that. A lot of people actually like to believe that this is a dream, that Ripley and them are still in the cryo sleep. And
Yeah.
Alien 5, actually, the Alien, I believe it was 5, they were actually going to move past this movie and act like it didn't even count and bring Hicks and Newt back. And they're still debating that on whether to do that as a movie. So this movie is kind of like, and I love to bring this up and love to kind of put it on that. It's like Nightmare on Elm Street 2. You don't really like to talk about this one too much, but
True.
it's
Yeah,
there.
that's a good one. That's a good quote, because it's sort of like, it's so far removed from the other ones that it can't be anything but just like, was that a fever dream that she had?
It's like that can't be the end. You know
That
what I
can't
mean?
be the end, and
Right. And
it's
it
so
wouldn't be.
weird. Yeah, it would. Yeah, of course.
Luke, I know you're. I don't know your opinion about this film, Luke. I want to hear it though.
It's mixed, because obviously, like, it's not as good, which I think everybody agrees. I do think there was a valiant effort made to do an interesting film, and I think with like Ripley's like final sacrifice, I even think with the death of Newt and them at the beginning, I think there's even an argument to be made that those are logical for the course of the Alien series. So it's quite dark. It's quite, I mean, I know it's a horror series, but like emotionally, it is quite a dour film. It's at a prison colony. I think, to me, it's more about that there was an attempt here to really try to follow up those two series, and they didn't get there. But I don't think there was. I don't want to say that there were necessarily mistakes made, but I think it was a lot of rewrites, a lot of uncertainty. I'm always still fascinated by the rough draft that was for years talking about the planet made of wood.
Wood, right?
Though, interestingly, a lot of the things people didn't like about that draft also make, because again, Newt and them, they die at the beginning too. The difference is that this is some sort of like it's a priory, it's a monk, like
right.
And
temple. They had that kind of in the film with their religion. The prisoners had that like pseudo religion.
Yeah, they had that thing going on. Yeah.
So I'm curious, because again, like the whole idea sounds almost fairy tale like, and I think that might have been an interesting direction to take the series. Because from this point on, with comics, with movies, or with comics and the novels and like video games, teach you, like, at this point, it then all veers into more hard sci-fi, focusing primarily on like the colonial marines, Weyland Toddy, things like that. It becomes a pretty well established world. Which, once again, I feel like there's actually as we want to talk about Star Wars, there's an interesting element to this, that where every time they come out with a Aliens movie, much like Star Wars, there's this like all of this lore and world building that is happening within comics and then the novels that build out the world, that build out all these side characters and factions and this, and then the movies choose to do nothing with that. They choose to just just do whatever. Right. Which you don't have to take everything, but it does feel that it does feel that maybe there's some value in taking the extra, not everything, but to make some type of draw or inspiration from the larger world that's been building in the background. Because obviously because the casual audiences aren't going to realize it one way or the other, but the fans will really, really appreciate it.
Mhm.
So,
Well, the fans definitely appreciated the resurrection, which, of course, everybody has to have a resurrection. Tupac,
Mhm.
Freddy Krueger, Jason. Why not aliens? And of course, in 1997, they tried to do that with Alien Resurrection. Of course, starred Sigourney Weaver, starred Winona Ryder too. When Winona Ryder was blazing the trail, had Ron Perlman. When Ron Perlman he was a little guy. Had Dominique Pinnon, Michael Wincott, Dan Haneda, J.E. Freeman, Brad Dourif, Raymond Cruz, Kim Flowers, Carrie Dorden, and Leland Ossier. So this was pretty awesome. It had Chucky in there. That's what I love too. The guy who played Chucky. But
I love Brad Dourif.
Yeah,
I do too.
Michael Wincott as well, the guy from Crow.
So yeah, right. So 200 years have passed since Ripley died on Fiona 161. Oh my God, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
161, the criminal planet.
Yeah.
Aboard the medical research vessel, the USMA Auriga, a team of scientists clone Ripley and extract from her a queen. So this movie is probably. It depends on what day you ask me whether I like this one or not, because I do watch it, and while I do enjoy it, there is some elements to it. I'm just like, oh dear God, like there is some. First of all, Weyland-Yutani's out of this one because it's actually like the United States that takes it over. United Systems is what they call it. So there's no more Weyland-Yutani. They even state that in the movie that Ripley's former employers used to try to kill her. You had some iconic funny scenes that still exist, probably in the realm of comedy, like the classic "kill me" when she's like,
right, gotta have those
in the lab, yeah, the "kill me." You had some great Ron Perlman, jokes. The "who do I have to fuck to get off this boat?" And he's like, "Well, I can get you off." He's like, "Maybe not the boat, but
Yeah.
Winona Ryder was the robot in this one. And she was decent. You had a lot of CGI aliens. They tried to use some element of real, but the aliens at this point were pretty much mostly CGI, and they looked pretty awful. Especially the underwater scenes are pretty bad. You still had the lore of aliens. You had one of the more creepiest things of all time, which was the alien baby, which was the it's like the humanoid alien, which basically
human alien hybrid,
which is probably one of the more freakiest things. That has one of the brutalest deaths I think of all time, because Ripley's giving this thing like a hug, giving it a big old bear hug, and basically swipes her blood, because now at this point Ripley is pretty much taking on kind of like in Terminator, with oh God, help me out there, Steve, with Connor, with Sarah Connor. Now she's part of them. If you can't beat them, basically join them. So
now she is like alien. Yeah.
So that's interesting about this film too, is she has like an understanding. There's also, again, more of the sexual element too, again. Yeah. But basically when that thing gets sucked out of the spacecraft at the end, spoilers, my audience, it is one of the most brutalest things I've ever seen, because it like gives this look of like, bro, why'd you do that, bro?
But it was not just that though, dude. It's like that's a lingering scene, doesn't it go on for a little bit?
Winona Ryder to come give it a hug, and Winona Ryder's like, oh, and then he's like, oh, and when I was like, oh, maybe it's cute. It's like, fuck that.
Little sunken in eyes. It's
right.
It's a weird again, this is what I was saying, harkening back to the first film, of like having an influential character like Ripley being a female lead in a action kind of / horror, because they did it again where they're like, well, we don't want to go completely action, but we want to go horror still, so we don't really know, we'll do both. And then we'll have her be half alien. That's really the only thing I was like, oh my God, this is so stupid. Why is she even here? This would have been fine if she wasn't even in the film. You know what I mean? It didn't have to, because it's surrounded by her. Right. And you could have just had this like
cloner killer, have that crew come on.
Yeah, you could have had that and had it still be an alien, like an action horror, would have been fine. But I felt like the Ripley thing, this is the first one where it kind of like did damage rather than good, even though
I've
Sigourney
never
did
never
fine.
looked at it like that. Yeah, Ripley didn't really need to be in this
She
film,
didn't
did
need
she?
to be
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Luke, what do you think of Resurrection?
I think this is funny. So, Alien Resurrection came out the same year as Event Horizon. If you were to ask me which is the movie that is more like Alien, it would not be the movie with Alien in the title.
Right.
Jesus, Luke.
Yeah, it's not aged well. It's aged it's very funny when you watch, and I was rewatching some clips, and it's like this movie was made for VHS, basically. Like when you see, like, if you go 4K, if you go high def, it's just atrocious. You need that grainy old TV look. You need the worn down VHS look
Right.
for this to be
Make it look
passable.
good.
Or I mean, it's already just browns and like sick greens. It's and yeah, it was this. So Alien 3 was a honorable failure. There was a lot to not like. There was a not there. There's clear reasons why it didn't live up to it, but there was an attempt. There was a design. There was something there. There was Alien Resurrection. No, it was
Yeah.
Alien Resurrection. It was like, well, I mean, why not? We gotta make like we should. It's the '90s. We gotta do something. And then somebody else was like, "Oh, what's Sigourney Weaver doing now?" I was like,
She was getting ready for what was that? Galaxy Quest.
Galaxy 97.
Yeah.
Fuck me.
So let's go ahead and move into what the next movie would have been. Oh yeah, I'd give Resurrection though probably about a 5. That's what I'd give it. I give Alien a 9. Give Aliens a 9.9. I give Alien 3 probably like a low 7, low 7, and then Resurrection I give like a 5.
Oh man, I'd give it a 6. I'd definitely
All right.
give it a 6.
So let's move on to what others would call the actual resurrection. And here, the difference between the movies that came out was, as I was stating in the first half of our analysis of this franchise, is that the movies diverge off where it comes to Aliens 2. But in a way, it comes full circle in Prometheus 2012. This is directed by Ridley Scott, the guy who made the first one, everybody. And I always make a joke about this, that Ridley Scott basically was really pissed off that, James Cameron made a lore that everyone loved beyond his. And basically he wanted to go back and be like, no, this is what it was supposed to be about. And basically fucked up the whole thing.
Yeah.
There was a joke that James Cameron said too, that he was waiting for Ridley Scott to give him a call about Prometheus so he could fix all the mistakes like he did in Aliens. And I thought that was hilarious. But guys, you've heard my long arduous about why I hate this film. However, it has changed a little bit. And I can see Steve's face right now.
I don't know. I wish it wouldn't change, but
Interesting. Very interesting.
So let's see here. So of course, this starred Naomi Rapace, Michael Fassbender, Charlize Theron, Idris Elba, Guy Pearce, Logan Marshall Green, Sean Harris, Rafa Spell, Emuel Elliott, Benedict Wong, and Kate Dickel. Basically, it is the discovery of a clue of mankind's origin on Earth leads a team of explorers to the darkest parts of the universe. 2 brilliant young scientists lead the expedition. Shaw hopes that they will meet a race of benevolent, godlike beings who will some way verify her religious beliefs. Now, I first learned about Prometheus while watching the commentary of Alien, in which Ridley Scott talked about this film, and he had always expressed his idea to want to explore the more idea of the space jockey, of the space engineers. That was the whole idea. Now, here's where I'm going with this, ladies and gentlemen. So this movie has a lot of elements of, basically, it tried not to be an alien film, but ultimately it was. And why, I don't know why Ridley Scott says it wasn't an alien film, because he took so much essence from the comics.
Mhm.
A lot is from the comics in this film, quite a lot, especially the goo. The black goo is probably one of a lot of people when they see that part of the movie, they're like, what does this have to do with Alien? I thought that for a long time until I read the comics. And I realized how that is actually from the comics, the idea of it. The idea that he said he wanted the alien, and it is in the comics that the engineers used the aliens as like a weapon. They were basically like a bomb they would drop off, but then they got out of control. However, somehow this led, and of course, as I like to point this out because Luke talks about this sometimes, where things in culture, converge. Ancient Astronauts was very, very popular during this time.
Yeah.
And it basically takes a back seat on the ancient astronaut theory to basically set up this like pseudo religion with the engineers and the aliens, and ultimately with David, who is the robot who, spoilers, ladies and gentlemen, who is basically bringing along Wayland because Wayland wants to learn the key of immortality, basically. So he's going to ask the engineers, because if there are creators, which they ultimately find out they want to destroy us, that how to live forever, but they instead beat the fuck out of him. And there's a deleted scene actually that makes a lot more sense, and that's the other part of this movie too, I'll say, guys, that kind of helped clarify it on me, is when David does actually find the engineer, he talks to him and he's just like, why, he actually asks Wayland, why do you want to live forever? And he's just like, because I'm a creator just like you, we both create, we don't deserve to die. And the alien's like, oh well, engineer's like, oh well, look at David, oh fuck you, boom, kills him anyway. Which is really funny. It's more funny.
It wasn't supposed to be funny though.
No, but it is, because he comes all that way just to get beaten down by a fucking robot head.
Yeah.
Which of course is a horrifying moment where he's just like, there's nothing. And then like he's like, I know. Have a safe journey, Mr. Wayland. So, ultimately that's the end of Wayland. And you also had Charlize Theron as his daughter, who played a great role as that. I thought she was actually better than I remember her. She gives him the whole speech of when a king gets old and he dies, how he needs to just stop trying to live forever and just like, let his rule come to an end. For all, but like I'm rambling on, but for ultimately all the faults that this movie had trying to be like connected to Alien, it was Alien, and it didn't need to kind of do too much. But the problem is, and here's why, is that it was so long before we had anything else. No one ever knew all that stuff. So you're pretty much taking a shot in the dark on hoping people are going to get this shit. And it was like, no, people had gone so far over to James Cameron's lore that we had all accepted that as fact, that all of a sudden Ridley Scott's like, no, this is more of like a religious type thing. And it's like, what? There was even an alien that was like crucified on the wall. in Prometheus. So, and I don't even need to get into Covenant because it's more ridiculous. They're the same films. They're ultimately the same films about David trying to create the xenomorph, and it doesn't make a lick of goddamn sense because he's doing it with the goo. In the comics, it makes sense because the aliens produce the goo when they need somebody to become a xenomorph or need an egg, blah, 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 blah. Ridley Scott took that concept, tried to say, no, it's like a religious thing, and that they're goo, and that basically David made the xenomorphs out of Elizabeth Shaw's body and shit, and this Alien Covenant is basically just a big, huge adventure to show you what the update version was. That's basically both those films.
Pretty much, in a nutshell.
So while I said, guys, my opinion has changed on this film, it has gone to, I ultimately hated every fiber of it, to I still think it's crap, but it's not bad crap.
Oh, it's bad, dude.
I still give it like a 5.
Yeah, man, I would give it a 5 too, bro.
Sorry, but that's ultimately what I'm gonna say about Prometheus.
Yeah, dude, no, man, I don't have anything really to say about Prometheus. It's just, it feels like such an experimental film at the time, just like you said, with the whole ancient astronauts. I remember that being so big, and this film, it feels like it's smelling its own farts too much. Just like, you get it, like only the real people would know. And it's like, no, nobody understands this. This is dumb as shit. Why am I even watching this? Or they're getting infected because the thing goes into the. It was so like, there's so many like questions you're asking while watching the film.
Right.
That's when you get disinterested. That's like the last time I watched this. I was like, I'm really gonna just watch this film. I don't care about my opinion. I'm just gonna go in and watch it, whatever, right? And I started asking all these questions. I'm like, see, that's the problem right there. It's like when you don't just take this as face value, then the problems start rising, and then you start asking questions about Wayland. Well, really, Wayland was pretty straightforward. It's when you start getting into the David stuff, is like, why? You know,
And then the
why?
second one
Why?
is so much. I don't know. And like I've always said from the get go, Alien has always been sexual. You can even look at that in the new Romulus thumbnails and trailers. The alien is all like up against the girls and everything like that. Because of the xenomorph is meant to be sexual. But what the hell is going on with David and the other android and Alien Covenant? I'm not even going to get into Covenant because I thought Covenant is worse. Covenant is terrible.
Yeah.
But there's this whole like. I swear to God, when I was watching that movie, like they're talking the whole time, he's like, blow into my flute. And I was like, oh my God, just kiss him. Just kiss him. Let's just get it.
I
and
mean,
they do.
and then,
I'm like,
and then they
let's
did.
just get
Yeah.
it.
Then they
And you
did.
know what? Don't say anybody say, oh, you're being homophobic. No, I would have thought that if it was a guy and a girl, I'd be like, oh my God, just kiss, because the sexual tension in this movie is ruining it.
Yeah.
Like I felt like Alien Covenant is just a pissing contest kind of movie. Like that's what I thought, because ultimately in Alien Covenant, David just destroys the engineer's homeworld and just tries to start the xenomorph race. That's all you all need to know.
I mean, and it was
And
like
guess what?
such a long trek of
And guess
like,
what?
going
dumb.
through these. Yeah, and
James
it's
Franco was in it for 2 seconds for the trailer.
yeah, and then he gets killed, and then it's so like, again, why did we have to go through all these winding roads to get to the very simplistic story of like, what's gonna happen? He starts the alien race, and then at the end of the film, what's so funny about it is it ends on such a pompous like, what do you think of that? It's
See,
like, I thought it sucked.
before I let you go, Luke, I want to say ultimately what the movie ended up being was what I said about it in our review of the Tomorrow War was Ridley Scott. They did the idea better. The aliens were just fucking cargo. Like, you don't need to make this religious element to the film. You just need to explain that's it. They were just cargo. They were like weapons themselves. Done. That's all they need to do. But Luke, continue. I want to hear what you think about Prometheus, and you can wrap Covenant into it too.
I mean, for me, Prometheus, it's like that ending. It's
dumb.
It's dumb, and especially because again, I feel that it was like, oh, it's going to be about the aliens. It's not about the aliens. There was all this back and forth, like what is actually Prometheus supposed to be? And then there was a thought that it was going to be its own thing. It wasn't related to aliens, and it was. And then at the end, you have the xenomorph come out, and it's like that's fucking. Like, you remember the movie Split? Like with James McAvoy? It's like at the end, it's like, oh, it's actually part of the fucking Unbreakable universe that nobody has thought about for 10 years. But that was at least kind of like, it was interesting because it was a surprise. This time it was, it was trying to act like it was a surprise, but we're like, we know, like Ridley Scott, we know this is all about aliens. We knew you were doing something with aliens. Some things are, for example, Wayland Yutani. And also his daughter was there. Didn't do anything really. Meant nothing. Also, the fact that Guy Pearce was so old. Like, I don't know why because the only thing I can think of is that
Wayland Yutani, his daughter was there.
Yeah. I don't know, like, what was the significance? Like, why did that even need to happen? Because they did nothing with it. But like the whole thing about Guy Pearce being like super, super old, the only thing I can think about is because they had that like promo of like Guy Pearce younger doing like a futuristic TED Talks, and then it's like, oh, now the movie, but like it means in my head I'm like, okay, the point that Guy Pearce is super super old is because he's trying to find the fountain of youth, even though there's no indication that they can do that. But like the point that like, oh, he will, before he dies, he's going to turn super young or something. And I'm assuming there was a draft. Something like that.
That part, literally, that's so funny you bring that up, because he literally is like, oh, I'm just going to go out in space and hope on a whim that these guys know the fountain of youth.
hope they know how to de-age me. Yeah, it's what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, right. It's just like, that's the thing. It's like when you start asking those questions, you're like, what the fuck? Why?
I guess it makes more sense if, again, like Ridley Scott, you think that this is a religious story, that it's like, okay, that it is supposed to have a mystical element, but like nobody sees that, and that isn't apparent at all throughout the film. And again, the greatest sin The single most biggest sin is that there is no sense of threat going on in Prometheus.
Or in
These-
Covenant.
There
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
I remember that scene when the guy, like, he gets his arm broken by the green thing. It's
The
like
penis monster.
a
Yeah.
penis monster. Because it's not scary. It's like you see
Oh.
the monster there. It wriggles around. The guy, like, he's completely nonchalant with it. It's not film test. Well lit. Well lit. And then the thing grabs onto his arm. Like, are we supposed to be scared? Are we supposed to be freaked out in that moment? Are we supposed to think it's like the face hugger? The face
Right.
hugger was terrified.
Yeah.
It was, the good parts of Alien is when it is tense, where you are in space. You have nowhere else to go. You are surrounded by big derelict machines that are hostile, and you cannot even trust those. Those are the only things keeping you safe, and it is a fleeting safety. But you don't get that with Prometheus. It's like, oh, let's not forget when Michael Fassbender just like he drops the parasite in, like, and we see it, like it's not.
Oh
it's
my
like
god,
casual.
that
He's
is so stupid.
He's just like, like it's.
You know why I
hate
did that, right? It had to be
guess,
that you're not a real boy comment. I always
Yeah,
thought,
it's
damn, that was
just like-
fucked up. They told the android that.
And,
There's a-
and the thing is that they also don't like follow up on that, and it's like, there's just so much that is. It feels like honestly, I put all of this on Ridley Scott because
I do too.
because I think there is a interesting script in here, but it's just filmed in a way that doesn't feel tense, that doesn't feel that doesn't make use of a sci-fi horror setting, and doesn't seem to be at all interested in the characters, despite most of the characters.
None of the characters were good.
Despite having the characters could be fine. Like there wasn't anything necessarily wrong with them. There was interesting parts to it too, but none of the characters were interesting. And even Michael Fassbender's character, who they tried to make he wasn't interesting. So
Yeah.
And I want to say the only funny thing about Alien Covenant, which I thought, and I know we've already done a review on it, so if you guys want to see that one, I will just tell you that it was terrible. Not just that, but I love when they go in the ship and those two people slip and it's like doot 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 doot, and the ship explodes with the alien just running out like
Yeah.
dumb.
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
But we'll go ahead and end it on a fun note though. The new movie looks good. The new movie is being produced by Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
The guy who's working on it, Alvarez, he wanted to make sure that the movie stayed true to the lore. So he actually talked to Cameron and Ridley Scott about this film and wanted to make sure that it was on par. So far, the trailers look really good. You have everything that is supposed to be in an Alien film.
Yeah.
So I'm actually
Very
looking
safe.
forward to it. I'm looking forward to the show. I hope the show is based more on Earth War. And if you guys don't actually, our audience, like the whole Newton Hicks died, you should check out Accounts of Earth War, which are the comic versions of an alternate universe where Hicks and Newt actually survive. They go on and back to Earth, and it's a whole memory loss thing. It's actually really good. So that is going to be our Alien special. We hope you have enjoyed it. I'm your host, Rob, with Luke and Steve.
Yo.
Go.
Coming to you from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And remember, out here in space and in the sea, no one can hear you scream.